Parfums de Marly Castley is one of the most interesting fresh niche fragrances that came out in the last few years. Bright bergamot, fresh ginger, black pepper, sparkling spices, modern woods. It smells clean, expensive, masculine, and incredibly versatile. But there's one problem, the Parfums de Marly price. So I went looking for fragrances that could give you the same spicy, citrusy, modern woody experience without spending hundreds of dollars. And today I have 4 very different answers. We have Khadlaj Onyx Silver, Mahajan, Perfumes, Desperado Frontier, dual brand King's Warhorse, and then we have Lattafa Mishlah, which may be the most interesting fragrance of the entire group because it's not actually a straight Castley clone at all. To my nose, Mishlah smells like somebody took Castley and crossed it with Viktor&Rolf Spicebomb Metallic Musk. And the results across all 4 of them are very different. One gives you about 90% of Castley overall. Another reaches about 90% in the dry down but becomes warmer and slightly sweeter. One comes in a massive 33% extrait concentration and gives Castley significantly more weight. And one basically takes the Castley idea and turns it into a powdery, musky, suede-like hybrid. So by the end of the video, I'm going to tell you which one is the closest Castley alternative, which one performs the best on my skin, which one gives you the best twist on the DNA, and most importantly, which one I would actually buy depending on what part of Castley you love. But before we judge the alternatives, we need to establish exactly what makes the original special. Parfums de Marly Castley notes are top notes bergamot, fresh ginger, black pepper. Heart notes petitgrain, citronner, Timur pepper, and neroli accord. Base notes akigel labdanum, and benzoin accord. Now, Castley was released in 2025, and what I like about this fragrance is that Parfums de Marly didn't simply make another blue fragrance or aquatic summer freshie. Castley takes a much spicier approach to freshness. Right from the opening, you get bergamot, fresh ginger, and black pepper. The bergamot gives you that immediate citrus brightness. But ginger is really important because it creates this fizzy, almost effervescent energy. And then you have the black pepper putting a dry, spicy edge around everything. So yes, it's fresh, but it has a bite. And that's important because the tension between freshness and spice basically defines the entire fragrance. As Castley begins drying down, you move into petitgrain, citronner, Timur pepper, and neroli accord. The petitgrain and neroli keep the citrus idea alive, but they make it greener and more aromatic. And Timur pepper is particularly interesting because it has that incredibly vibrant, almost citrusy spicy character. So Castley doesn't actually change direction after the opening. Instead, that bright citrus gradually becomes greener, drier, and even more pepper-driven. And underneath everything, you have akigel labdanum, and benzoin. Akigel is a huge part of Castley personality. It gives the fragrance this modern, spicy, woody character with patchouli-like facets. The labdanum and benzoin provide warmth and depth underneath all that brightness. And that's why I don't think Castley smells like just another citrus fragrance. The citrus gets your attention, the ginger gives it energy, the pepper gives it personality. But those modern woods and warm resins give Castley its backbone. The final result is fresh, spicy, woody, masculine, polished, and extremely versatile. Performance is also one of the things that surprised me about Castley. On my skin, I'm getting right around 8 hours of longevity, which is very respectable considering how bright and fresh this fragrance starts. Projection is noticeable without becoming overwhelming. For the first couple hours, I get pretty obvious scent bubble around me. After that, Castley starts sitting closer to the skin, but you continue getting that clean, peppery, woody trail. And I also noticed something interesting when wearing it in warmer conditions. When my body temperature rises, the combination of ginger, pepper, and woods seems to become more noticeable again. So I wouldn't describe Castley as some nuclear fragrance that's going to fill the entire room. That's not what Castley is, but for a fresh fragrance, the performance on my skin is definitely above average. Before we get into affordable alternatives, there's another comparison worth discussing because some people considering Castley are also looking at fragrances like Louis Vuitton Imagination. They're not clones, they don't smell identical, but I think they occupy similar space in somebody's collection. Imagination gives you that incredibly clean combination of citrus, black tea and ambrox. To my nose, it's airy, smooth, slightly soapy and exceptionally polished. Castley feels different, it's more pepper forward, more obviously spicy, woodier and overall more traditionally masculine to my nose. Imagination is smoother and more transparent, Castley has more bite. Personally, I do use both fragrances in many of the same situation, but Castley gives me more masculine, peppery, woody interpretation of that expensive, modern, fresh fragrance category. And now that we know exactly what we are trying to reproduce, let's get into the affordable alternatives. Starting with the one that surprised me. First up is Khadlaj Onyx Silver. And right from the opening, the inspiration becomes pretty obvious. You get bergamot, ginger, and black pepper. That's essentially the same opening architecture that immediately makes Castley recognizable. The bergamot gives you citrus lift, the ginger provides that energetic freshness, and the black pepper gives you that dry, spicy edge. But as these fragrances develop, Onyx Silver starts showing its own personality. Instead of Castley's petitgrain citronnier and timut pepper and neroli combination, Onyx Silver gives you petitgrain and cardamom. And that cardamom changes things. Castley Heart feels brighter, more sparkling, and slightly greener. Onyx Silver becomes warmer and a little more traditionally spicy. Then we get into the base. Castley uses akigo wood, benzoin, and labdanum. Onyx Silver gives you patchouli, labdanum, benzoin, and tonka bean. And this is where Onyx Silver really starts separating itself from the original. Instead of remaining aggressively dry and woody, the patchouli and tonka give the late dry down a little more density, warmth, and sweetness. It's still absolutely fresh, spicy fragrant, but the deeper you get into the wearing, the smoother and warmer it becomes. And actually, I think that's what makes Onyx Silver interesting beyond simply being a Castley alternative. Now let's put some numbers on it. In the opening, I would put Onyx Silver at around 85% similarity to Castley. You immediately recognize the DNA because that bergamot, ginger, and black pepper combination is there. The biggest difference in the opening is refinement. Castley feels slightly smoother and more sparkling. Onyx Silver can be a little harsher during the first few minutes, especially when the black pepper is really pushing forward. But give it 5 to 10 minutes, once that original roughness settles, this fragrance improves dramatically. And surprisingly, I think Onyx Silver actually gets closer as it dries down. In the dry down, I would put at roughly 90% similar to Castley. Not identical, but very convincing. The biggest difference is that Castley remains cleaner, airier, and drier. Onyx Silver becomes slightly warmer, sweeter, and heavier because of the patchouli and tonka bean. So if you love Castley but wouldn't mind adding a little warmth to the DNA, the difference might actually work in an Onyx Silver's favor. Performance on my skin is about 5 to 7 hours. Projection is strongest during the first hour or two. You get a noticeable scent bubble without the fragrance becoming overwhelming, and then it gradually moves closer while keeping that fresh, spicy, woody character. I wouldn't call it a monster performer, but considering the price category, I think the performance is perfectly respectable. As far as negatives go, Onyx Silver has a slightly harsher opening. Castley simply smells more refined during the first few minutes. Once Onyx Silver has been sitting on your skin for 10 minutes or so, it becomes a very convincing alternative. I also think that Onyx Silver is very versatile. Spring and fall are probably its strongest seasons. You have got enough citrus and freshener to wear it during summer evenings, and because of that warmer spicy base, you can even carry this into milder winter weather. Office? Absolutely. Dinner? Easy. Date night? Definitely. This has that crisp button-down, nice watch, tailored jacket type of personality. Fresh and clean, but still masculine and polished. So Onyx Silver is going to be the choice for somebody who wants the Castley idea with slightly warmer and sweeter dry down. But our next fragrance goes after Castley even more directly. Next we have Desperado Frontier by Mahajan Perfumes. And if you are judging this fragrance strictly by their published note pyramid, Mahajan isn't exactly trying to hide what it's inspired by. Bergamot, ginger, black pepper, petitgrain citronner, timut pepper, neroli. Akigel labdanum. This is essentially note-for-note recreation of Castley structure. But this is also where we have to remember something important. When talking about clone fragrances, identical notes on a website do not mean identical fragrance on skin. Materials matter, concentration matters, proportions matter, blending matters, and that's exactly why Frontier still smells slightly different from Castley. But out of the fragrances we are discussing today, this is one of the most impressive interpretations. To my nose, Desperado Frontier is a solid 90% similar to Castley overall, and that is extremely impressive. DNA is recognizable almost immediately. You get the same bright citrus, fresh ginger, pepper, aromatic greenery, and modern spicy woods. If you already know what Castley smells like and somebody sprays Frontier in the air around you, you are probably going to understand immediately what Mahajan was trying to recreate. But there is a difference, and once again that difference is most obvious in the opening. Castley has this beautiful, sparkling, almost effervescent quality. The ginger feels crisp, the bergamot feels bright, and there is a lot of transparency around the individual notes. Frontier comes across slightly denser, and I get more emphasis on the pepper, especially that combination of black pepper and the citrusy, spicy quality of a Timur pepper. So for the first few minutes, Castley feels brighter, a little more refined. But once Frontier settles, the gap gets much smaller. The citrus starts merging into that peppery, spicy, woody backbone. The Akigel wood style character becomes more apparent. And that's where Frontier becomes remarkably convincing. The biggest advantage Castley still maintains is the refinement. The ginger comes across crispier, brighter, more sparkling, and you get a little more space between individual components. Frontier pushes that pepper harder, it's slightly thicker, slightly spicier, and not quite as airy. But here is what's important. I don't think Frontier smells cheap, and that's one of the biggest compliments I can give an affordable interpretation of expensive fresh fragrance. Sometimes you smell a clone, and the first 10 seconds immediately remind you why the original costs more. You can get this harsh, aggressive synthetic opening, and you just want to wait for it to disappear. I'm not getting any of that effect here. Frontier still smells polished. As it moves deeper into the dry down, it also gets a little more emphasis on a warmer benzoin side. So Castley stays somewhat brighter and drier. Frontier becomes slightly warmer and fuller. But we are talking about differences inside essentially the same scent profile. Not two fragrances moving in completely different directions. And performance has been very good for me. I'm consistently getting 7 to 8 hours of longevity from Desperado Frontier. For something using this much citrus, ginger, and fresh spice, I'm completely satisfied with that. Projection is strongest during the first 2 hours. There is an obvious scent bubble around you, but it doesn't become obnoxiously loud. After that, it slowly settles down while the spicy, woody base continues hanging around. Even toward that 7 to 8 hour point, I can still pick up traces of woody, slightly resinous dry down. And naturally, on clothing, it lasts even longer. So, performance? Not nuclear, but very good. And for this DNA, this is exactly where I want it, honestly. The biggest strength is obvious. Frontier captures the Castley DNA extremely well. Fresh, spicy, clean, masculine, and very modern. And incredibly easy to wear. The dry down is especially convincing. Once past the opening, I think the average person smelling those fragrances in the air would have an extremely difficult time identifying which one you are wearing. Then you add 7 to 8 hours of performance and a price around $50 for 100 milliliters, and the value becomes very hard to ignore. The weakness? Again, the opening. Castley is brighter, more transparent, and ultimately more refined. Frontier is slightly denser and more pepper forward. So if you are somebody who buys luxury fragrance specifically for that final 10% of refinement, Castley still gives you something Frontier doesn't completely reproduce. But if your question is simply, how close can I get to Castley without paying Castley money? Desperado Frontier is going to be extremely difficult to beat in this group. Next, Dua Brand's King's Warhorse. Top notes are bergamot, fresh ginger, and black pepper. Heart notes, petitgrain citronner, timut pepper, and neroli accord. Base notes, akigel wood, labdanum, and benzoin accord. Concentration is 33.33%. It's definitely Extrait de Parfum. And just like Frontier, Dua publishes essentially the same note pyramid as Castley. Dua presents King's Warhorse as Extrait de Parfum, and that higher concentration becomes very relevant when you smell these fragrances side by side, because King's Warhorse doesn't feel as airy as Castley. It feels denser, warmer, and heavier. Right from the opening, the Castley connection is obvious. You got bright citrus, ginger, and pepper. But Castley gives you more air around everything. The bergamot feels brighter, the ginger feels more sparkling, and the entire fragrance feels more transparent. King's Warhorse has more weight. The ginger is there, but to my nose it feels slightly less fizzy and more substantial. And the woody, resinous elements seem to show themselves much earlier. That doesn't mean King's Warhorse smells bad. It simply means that the opening isn't where this fragrance is at its most accurate. Because once you allow it to settle, things get considerably more interesting. In the opening, I would put King's Warhorse at around 80%, similar to Castley. The DNA is clearly recognizable, but Castley is brighter, smoother, and more effervescent. Then, when King's Warhorse starts drying down, when the citrus pulls back, the pepper becomes more integrated. The Akigawood, labdanum, and benzoin character becomes more important. And suddenly, that gap gets much smaller. In the dry down, I would put King's Warhorse at a very strong 90% similarity. And that's where this fragrance earns its money. Once both fragrances have been on the skin for a while, that warm, peppery, modern woody character becomes extremely convincing. So if we break this down, opening around 80%, dry down around 90%. Overall, let's call it 85% depending on which stage of Castley matters most to you. And that last part is important, because if you absolutely live for Castley's sparkling first 20 or 30 minutes, King's Warhorse isn't the closest option here. But if you mainly love the peppery, modern, woody dry down, this gets very close. Now we have to address that concentration, because 33.33% sounds huge. But higher concentration doesn't automatically mean the fragrance smells better. In King's Warhorse, I think it helps explain why the fragrance feels denser and more substantial than Castley. You get more weight, more body, and the woody and resinous aspects seem to arrive earlier. Whether that's an improvement really depends on what you want. If you love that light, sparkling transparency of Castley, you might actually prefer the original, or one of the other clones. But if you want something with more density and a heavier, extrait style presentation, King's Warhorse gives you that. Dua also recommends some of its fragrances to rest when needed. So if your bottle initially smells particularly dense or rough, spraying it several times and letting it sit for a few weeks may allow it to become a lot smoother and more cohesive. It was not needed for my bottle. I wouldn't expect fragrance to magically transform into something completely different, but it can be worth keeping in mind. On my skin, I'm getting roughly 6 to 8 hours of longevity. Projection is strongest during the first couple of hours. You get an obvious cloud of spicy and woods around you. Then the fragrance starts settling closer while remaining detectable for several additional hours. 6 to 8 hours is very respectable for this type of fresh, spicy, woody DNA. And because King's Warhorse has that denser extrait style character, it generally feels more substantial in the air than some lighter fresh fragrances. I think this works especially well during spring, early fall, and cooler summer days or evenings. Office, business casual, dinner, date night. Anywhere you want freshness without smelling overly sporty or aquatic. King's Warhorse feels mature and put together. And now we get to the wild card, Lattafa Mishlah. Because if you are watching this video strictly because you want the closest clone of Castley, Mishlah is not going to win. But it may be the most creative fragrance here. And to explain why, we need another fragrance. Viktor&Rolf Spicebomb Metallic Musk. Now, Spicebomb Metallic Musk have notes of black pepper, white musk, silver suede accord. Metallic musk is much simpler on paper. But the key isn't complexity, it's texture. You get that sharp pepper on top of smooth, powdery white musk, and then that soft suede-like character underneath. And when I smell Mishlah, I get elements of Castley combined with that smoother, powdered metallic musk personality. The easiest way I can describe is this. Castley gives Mishlah the structure. Metallic musk gives Mishlah the texture. Notes for Lattafa Mishlah are top notes bergamot, black pepper, and lavender. Heart notes petitgrain and iris. Base note musk, cedarwood, amber, and olibanum. Mishlah opens with bergamot, black pepper, and lavender. The bergamot and black pepper immediately create part of the Castley connection. But Castley has fresh ginger. Mishlah gives you lavender. And that single change in the opening already shifts the fragrance. Castley is brighter and fizzier. Mishlah feels smoother, more aromatic, and slightly more dressed up. Then you move into petitgrain and iris. The petitgrain keeps some of that green citrus bitterness that connects it back to Castley, but the iris changes the texture. Lattafa describes this part of Mishlah as having a powdery, suede-like quality, and that's exactly where I start making connection with metallic musk. Mishlah doesn't officially list suede, but the iris gives me the same smooth, soft, almost leathery texture. Finally, you get musk, cedarwood, amber, and olibanum, frankincense, in the base. And now Mishlah really starts becoming its own fragrance. The cedar makes it drier, the amber adds warmth, and the musk reinforces that smooth texture. And the olibanum adds this subtle resinous incense character in the background. So Mishlah isn't Castley with a different bottle, and it's not metallic musk with extra citrus. It's somewhere between them. If you are buying Mishlah expecting a perfect Castley clone, I think you are going to be disappointed. There's definitely Castley DNA here. You have that bergamot and black pepper in the opening. You have petitgrain, and you get a general movement from the spicy freshness into a warmer woods. But the Castley biggest signature comes from that fresh ginger, timut pepper, and neroli combination. Mishlah doesn't reproduce that exact sparkling effect. Lavender and iris makes Mishlah smoother, more aromatic, more powdery, more musky, and that's where the metallic musk influence becomes stronger. If I had to put numbers on an overall impression, I would say Mishlah feels roughly 60% metallic musks and 40% Castley. Not because the published notes are identical. They aren't. I'm talking about the overall smell and texture. The powdery, musky, suede-like character plays such a huge role in Mishlah that I think metallic musk ultimately becomes the stronger side of the hybrid. So remember, hybrid, not a direct clone. And ironically, that's exactly why I like Mishlah. If Lattafa had simply copied Castley note for note, we would judge the fragrance almost entirely on accuracy. Instead, Mishlah takes pieces of two different fragrance styles and connects them. From Castley, you get that spicy citrus green framework. From metallic musk, you get that smooth, powdery, musky suede feeling. Then Lattafa adds lavender, iris, cedarwood, amber, and olibanum. Basically frankincense. The result is warmer, more aromatic, more resinous, less sparkling than Castley, but also more complex than metallic musk. Even the presentation works with the personality. You have the matte charcoal bottle with gold accents that look considerably more expensive than what the fragrance actually costs. The presentation feels mature, polished, and slightly Middle Eastern without the fragrance becoming overly sweet, overly heavy, and overly traditional. On my skin, Mishlah gives me around 7 hours longevity. Projection is moderate for roughly the first 2 hours. Then it settles closer, maintaining a clean scent bubble. On clothing, that musky, woody, amber incense base sticks around considerably longer. Again, it isn't nuclear. And actually, I think that's appropriate for this style. Mishlah feels designed for situations where you want to smell polished rather than aggressive. Excellent for spring, early fall. Definitely cooler summer evenings. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for a 95-degree heat, because once that musk and amber wood and incense start building, it can feel slightly heavier. But for the office, absolutely. Mishlah has that clean, mature, put-together quality. Lattafa officially markets it as unisex, and I think that's fair. To my nose, through the black pepper, lavender, cedarwood, and aromatic structure, give it a moderate masculine lean. Alright, now let's make this simple. We have smelled the original, we have broken down all 4 alternatives. So which one should you actually buy? If you want the closest overall Castley experience, for me, Desperado Frontier is the standout. I am giving it a solid 90% similarity overall. The opening is slightly denser and more pepper forward than Castley. But once it reaches the dry down, the resemblance becomes extremely close. If accuracy to Castley is your number one priority, this is where I would start. If you want Castley with a warmer, slightly sweeter dry down, go with Khadlaj Onyx Silver. The opening is around 85% similar to my nose. The dry down gets around 90%. You still get that bergamot, ginger, and pepper DNA, but cardamom, patchouli, and tonka make this fragrance warmer, denser, and slightly sweeter than Castley original. Performance for me is 5 to 7 hours. So this isn't the strongest performer in the group, but it's very easy fragrance to recommend if you like Castley idea and wouldn't mind a little more warmth. If you want the densest, heaviest extrait style interpretation, that's King's Warhorse from Dua brand, because it doesn't recreate Castley airy sparkling character quite as accurately. But the dry down, around 90%. And that extrait concentration gives King's Warhorse a thicker, heavier presentation. So, if the woody peppery dry down is your favorite part of Castley and you prefer denser fragrances, King's Warhorse makes a lot of sense. And if you want the most unique fragrance, that's Lattafa Mishlah. Do not buy Lattafa Mishlah expecting direct Castley clone. To my nose, you are getting about 40% Castley and 60% metallic musk in the overall DNA. It's smoother, more powdery, more musky, more aromatic. You get lavender, iris, cedar, amber, and incense, taking the Castley idea somewhere very different. So Mishlah isn't the accuracy winner. It's definitely the creativity winner. And it's a hybrid of two extremely good scents. But after smelling all of these, there's one final question we have to answer. Does the original Castley still make sense? And I think it does. Because none of those fragrances completely reproduce what Parfums de Marly does in the first few minutes. There's more air around the individual notes. And the transition from sparkling freshness into those dry modern woods feels incredibly polished. So, if money isn't the primary concern and you want the best execution of the DNA, I still think Castley is the benchmark. The biggest question is whether that few percent difference really is worth a few $100s to you. Because in a dry down, things are incredibly similar. But now I want to hear from you. Have you tried Parfums de Marly Castley? And more importantly, have you tried any of these alternatives? Drop your experience in comments, especially your longevity numbers, because performance can vary dramatically from one person to another. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And as always, if you are interested in checking out any of these fragrances featured in today's video, I'll leave links down in the description below. Some of those links may be affiliate links, which means I earn a small commission if you make a purchase through those links, at no additional cost to you. It helps support the channel. And as always, thank you very much for watching.